Good afternoon. My name's Katie McRobert. I'm a member of the Farm Riders Committee and I'm also the Executive Director of the Australian Farm Institute. We're here this afternoon to talk about fixing the cost of living crisis. And we've put a nice provocative headline there in the email that we sent out to everybody asking, are the supermarkets really the ones to blame? Some of them are here in the room. You can ask them yourselves after we've finished having a chat. Depending on where you stand on the question of supermarket pricing and who's responsible, it might actually affect where you sit on the issues. Reviews, inquiries, hearings, submissions, people in costumes, shouting and threats, it's all part of the process of bringing down the price of fresh food at the supermarket checkout. Or is it? Should there be greater price transparency between the farm gate and supermarket prices? With allegations flying around about price gouging, rank profiteering, anti-competitive behaviour, who is actually responsible and at what point in the supply chain? Are the supermarkets really the ones at fault? What are the other factors at play? So to discuss this issue with us today, we have the Deputy Chair of the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission, the ACCC, Mick Keogh, also former Executive Director of the Australian Farm Institute, who is a long-standing champion for fair competition in the Australian agricultural sector. And we hope to hear from Mick on opportunities the ACCC has to address these concerns about competition practices. We also have with us Emma Germano, the Managing Director of her family mixed operation I Love Farms in South Gippsland, Victoria, who grows vegetables and runs beef and sheep. I Love Farms has a farm gate store which allows a connection straight from the farm to the community. So that's an interesting aspect she'll probably tease out as well. And of course, she's also President of the Victorian Farmers Federation, and as well as a Director of the Queen Victoria Markets. As well, put the important things first, Emma. So I'll invite Emma and Mick to come up to the stage and join us here. And the format for today, we're going to kick off with a short statement from each of our speakers, and then we're going to have a bit of a moderated conversation. We'll also take a lot of questions from the floor, so get your questions ready and get your waving hand primed, ready to go, and I'll keep an eye out. Over to you, Mick Keogh.
Thank you, Katie, and thanks everyone for turning up, and my apologies, the level of entertainment that I'm able to bring to my presentation I'm sure won't match those that you're anticipating. And yes, it did strike me that a complaint to the ACCC about misleading advertising might be one we have to consider seriously, but we'll battle on and see how we go. So as per Katie's introduction, the issue of supermarkets is one that engages a lot of people. The ACCC has been directed by the Treasurer to conduct a year-long inquiry into them, and it's important that I think it's understood that the inquiry is two-sided. So it's looking at the role of supermarkets from a consumer perspective, in other words, the prices consumers pay, the arrangements that consumers exercise their ability to go to supermarkets and make choices and all those sorts of things, but it's also focused on the supply side, so the situation of suppliers who engage with supermarkets. We kicked off the inquiry early in March with two things. One is an issues paper that went out for stakeholder comment and submissions, and the other was a consumer survey, an online consumer survey taking about 10 minutes. Interestingly, we received the highest level of responses we've ever received to a consumer survey. 22,000 people completed the entire survey, spread right across Australia. So I guess it really highlighted the, from the consumer perspective, the absolute significance they see in the role of supermarkets in their lives. We've also had quite a deal of engagement from suppliers, both in terms of submissions and also direct face-to-face meetings. One of the interesting aspects of that, which maybe wouldn't surprise some people in the room, is quite a deal of hesitation on behalf of suppliers. In fact, some of them insisting on confidentiality, and we've even had meetings in obscure coffee shops to assure them of the degree of confidentiality associated with it. So that is an interesting aspect. In terms of where the inquiry is up to, we've issued the initial sets of information notices to the supermarkets. They usually entail a fair bit of detail and a fair bit of data. They are in the process of responding, and we expect to have further work and perhaps further notices as the year progresses. We anticipate providing an interim report in August and a final report in February next year. I think one of the issues that's worth just teasing out a little bit in relation to our inquiry is as someone said to me when we first started, so what's the problem you're trying to solve? And I think that's quite an important question, and I think it's basically framed around the issue of market power and market failure. So the question is whether or which participants in these supply chains have market power and how they exercise that market power and what the implications of that are for other participants in the supply chain. Now, some would say, well, in terms of market power, supermarkets have to compete. They've got Aldi, they've got the other major retailer, they've got convenience stores and all those sorts of things. Surely they haven't got that much market power at the consumer level because they have to compete for prices. And there's some interesting issues there because, of course, there's headline prices and there's actual prices that consumers pay, and there's specials and there's promotions and there's bulk buys and there's deals and there's members' prices. And so there's quite a deal of, I guess, opaqueness in the prices that consumers actually pay. And so that raises a whole range of issues of the extent to which there is actual competition there, or is it something less than competition? Is it something more akin to some sort of cooperation? And so that's a legitimate question we intend to tease out. On the supplier side, the same comment can be made. Well, you can supply one or you can supply the other and you can pay them off in terms of pricing. The issue there is not just pricing, however, it's the extent to which risk is transferred down the supply chain or up the supply chain as a consequence of the terms of the contractual arrangements, and the extent to which that transfer of risk results in, for example, reduced profitability in upstream sectors, perhaps reduced investment in innovation, etc., etc. So it's quite a complex set of questions we have to tease out and get to the bottom of in terms of the inquiry and what recommendations we might make going forward. And I guess the other point that's often made is that even where market power's identified and where there may be harm occurring, sometimes the impact of regulation is more than the cost of regulatory arrangements can be more than the resulting benefit that comes out of it. So governments will necessarily, and regulators doing inquiries will necessarily try and weigh up how much of that harm is occurring. Can it be addressed through regulatory measures, and would those regulatory measures actually deliver a net benefit when all things are considered? So it's quite a complex area. We have a team of I think nearly 40 staff on it. Some of them have skills in data that I didn't even know existed. So it's as you can imagine, a very big project and a lot of work to be done. Unfortunately, I can't foreshadow what results might be or even what the findings might be at this stage, but I think it's worthwhile just making people aware of the process and where we're up to. So thank you.
Mick's actually apologised for having to turn up as himself. I will apologise for not being Bob Catter, which I wouldn't ordinarily do on a normal day, but today I'm very sorry that I'm Bob Catter, not Bob Catter. We can play Bobcatter bingo, so if you'd like to start with your scorecard, let's let 1,000 blossoms bloom. And I promise that at some point I'll turn just really thunderously dark and it'll feel very irrelevant and like a completely moot point. So I'm really, really sorry I'm not Bobcatter, but I'm not sorry that what I think is that Bobcatter is barking up the wrong tree when it comes to the supermarkets. Now, no one enjoyed bashing up a supermarket more than I did, particularly as a grower of horticulture products. My farm has both horticulture products and sheep and beef, and the difference between the way that I do business in my sheep business versus the horticulture business, there is no question that the supermarkets have played a major role in how successful my business can be. Now, I didn't actually directly supply a supermarket. I went through an intermediary. And what's been really interesting is that the commentary coming out about the supermarkets has largely been from a lot of people who are not necessarily direct suppliers to supermarkets. So whilst I'd love to bash up the supermarkets today because that is, what's trendy and makes us all feel good, what we've all done is just run down this track of the best smokescreen I think that I've seen the federal government play in the last 10 years. Because the cost of living crisis has far more to do with the policies that are in their control than the things that are, yes, maybe a little bit their business, but this issue between suppliers and supermarkets has been a 20-year issue. Now all of a sudden we care. Why do we care? Oh, the poor farmers. We only care about the poor farmers because it suits a narrative of the federal government to get out of the fact that energy is so ridiculously expensive because we've got no energy security. Our industrial relations system is a complete and utter cock-up and totally impossible to manage as a small business. The cost of having staff on farms has increased about 20% over the last 4 years and is continuing to increase. That's if you could get any staff. So we didn't have any staff, and then they said, you know what, you can get all of the staff out of the Pacific Islands, and that in and of itself has created an issue. We've got unions firmly up our backside in just about every avenue of the supply chain. We've got supermarkets who are making on average between 2 and 3% net profit. And if we look at any business that any of us might run, to say that you might get a 2 to 3% net profit, is that really exorbitant? Are we actually saying that the supermarkets are making too much money? The best bit is when we have small business people saying, but they made $1 billion profit last year. It's like, yeah, but they employed 300,000 Australians. Their shareholders are mum and dad investors. And at no point in time have we kind of extrapolated out where does the money go and how does it actually underpin the economy that we have. So as much as I hate the supermarkets probably more than the next guy, this is bullshit. The price gouging inquiry, the simple one line should have been, it's more expensive to buy the meat at your butcher. It is more expensive to buy the vegetables from the providor. So how can we talk about price gouging in this sense as if there's this absolute uproar about how expensive it is to buy things in the supermarket? Well, go outside of the supermarket, do your shopping basket at one of the boutiques and tell me how much change you get out of that and how it compares to what would have happened in the supermarkets. The issue between, or the issues within the relationships between suppliers and the supermarkets, no doubt are an issue. But like I said, those have been an issue for a really long time. So is it good that we're starting to address that relationship? Yes. But is it good that we're letting a federal government get away with the fact that the biggest increase to the price of production are the things that are within their purview and within their power that they have done nothing about, and not just this government, so in case you think I'm going to choose a colour, this government and the one before it. So it's all cute that we have a David Littleproud who says, oh, the supermarkets, the supermarkets, the supermarkets. Well, why didn't he do something about the supermarkets and that problem when the coalition was in government? So my biggest concern is that we're all looking in the wrong direction. And when did you say that your findings are going to come in? Is that before or after the next federal election? Hate to be cynical, right? But let's just hope that your findings is that it's all the supermarket's fault. It's got nothing to do with anything that the government does, because what have they got to do with running the country and the cost of living, right? So that's how I feel about the circumstance. Divestiture, let's just have an absolute knee-jerk reaction and say what we should do, which is turn what has been a duopoly. Yes, there's competition issues, no question about that either, but let's just have a knee-jerk reaction where we say what we should do is create divestiture powers. What, just for the supermarkets? Are we going to start talking about how that might implicate other businesses in the supply chain or our farms ourselves? And for any farm advocacy organisation, including mine, but for anybody who is advocating for farmers that there should be a floor price, that is absolute nonsense. I don't want a floor price on my farm. I want to be able to operate in a free market, because the second that you create a floor price, I can guarantee you that's the price that I will get every single day of the week. So really easy to come up with all of these statements that make people feel better, and it's particularly gross because people are really actually starting to suffer. The implications of a poor economy at the moment are really starting to impact just about every Australian, even those who are wealthy, because the whole vibe of how we live and the culture that we're living in, the community that we're living in, is shifting and changing. So again, can we just simply blame Coles and Woolworths for all of that? I think that that's giving them far too much credit in regards to how much power they have over the country. I'll leave it there.
There you go. So no singing, no dancing from either speaker. There is still time to get in an interpretive dance if you would like to. But a couple of interesting statements there that I think probably both of you would probably like to respond to each other as well. And Mick, I'm going to go to you. Some of the things Emma said there did actually echo what you'd said before too about market concentration. Do you want to speak a little bit more about that and what your view is, not just from the ACCC, but more, you've been in agricultural competition issues for a very long time.
Yeah, there's that issue on a number of levels. So the Australian economy is characterised by concentrated markets. So if we compare the measures of concentration in sectors of our economy with, for example, the US or Europe, we're off the scale. They wouldn't tolerate the HHIs for those that are economists that we have here. So there's no doubt about that. But there's also no doubt about the fact that a concentrated market where market power exists creates the potential for harm. And careful with the words I said there. So creates the potential. And where there is harm occurring, then governments typically have a look at that and try and work out ways to address it. So I think there's probably broad general recognition that yes, supermarkets, particularly the two majors, do have market power. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Do they exercise that to the detriment of the consumers? Well, that's a legitimate question. Do they exercise that to the disadvantage of their suppliers? Again, that's a more complicated question because you've got large multinationals with very strong brand presence who I'm sure the supermarkets would tell them what to do. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got a large number of suppliers of perishable products who certainly don't have anything that would be even slightly considered to be market power. So the opportunity, if you like, is there for harm, so it's legitimate to have a good hard look at what has been happening in practice and whether there's a need to do something about that. And that's basically what the inquiry is about. Yes, I'm not disagreeing with Emma in relation to the cost of living. I think it's been an interesting... It's obviously been a matter that concerns a lot of people, and you see that in a whole range of different ways, in the energy market, in food and grocery, in petrol, in all sorts of things. But certainly our interest is in this issue of the extent of market power in the supermarket sector, how it's exercised and whether that causes any harm.
And following on from that, Emma, I'm going to throw to you. I read a very catchy headline this week that said you can't turn off a tree. And I spoke to a representative of a fruit and vegetable association who was talking about their suppliers being told 1 week out from supply how much would be needed and what the price was they were going to get. So I don't work in fruit and vegetables, you do. Can you tell us a little bit more about those sorts of things and whether or not there is actually genuinely a risk with this market power concentration that people are being taken advantage of?
There's no question that the risk is problematic for farmers, particularly smaller farmers, and particularly in where you don't have a lot of other market avenues. So, like I said, I'm not we don't have a sheep station where, I have about 1,500, we turn off maybe 2,000 lambs a year, which is not massive, but it's comparatively to my vegetable growing part of the business, there's a huge export market for the livestock out of this country. And so to do business in that avenue, or that avenue of business in my particular business, is actually easier. There's also a lot more transparency around prices. So price reporting mechanisms are there as well. You can jump onto Auctions Plus, you can see exactly what the market was doing last week. There's all of that there. That amount of information is not available when you're a fruit or vegetable grower. Mainly fruit a little bit better, but vegetables a nightmare. We don't export much vegetables, which makes vegetables even more difficult than, say, fruit crops. What's really interesting is that there was a point in time, maybe about 3 or 4 years ago, that I was speaking with SPC, and they were saying that their biggest challenge was not getting enough fruit. And now we're in the position where we've got people pulling out their orchards and their trees because SPC can't take the fruit. And we talk about the fact that the supermarket home brands are actually using imported products. So there's so many different factors here that we can't just overinflate one particular element and say that's the silver bullet. That's the thing that if we do that, it'll change everything else. The other thing we have to think about is the way that people farm. And we're not businesses like other businesses in the fact that we are unbelievably emotionally connected to our land. All of the farmers that I know identify themselves as a farmer first and foremost before nearly being a human being. And that there is... because of that emotional connection and the way that you've done things for 3 generations, you've got this sense of loyalty that you have to keep going, and that sometimes means that you make poor business decisions. We're in a market where the suppliers are oversupplying the market all of the time. So perhaps there were just too many fruit trees. And that I'm not allowed to say that as a farmer representative person or advocate, because that sounds really harsh. But if you want to grow too many potatoes, you can expect that the potatoes are going to be really cheap and that you're going to create all of these avenues where you can be taken advantage of, whether it's by the supermarkets or by any other market. So the power imbalance is problematic. And it's even just the sophistication of the different businesses. So when did I go out and find myself an export market? I had sent some crates of broccoli off to one of the supermarkets through an intermediary, and I won't name the supermarket because that would be terrible, and they may or may not be in the room. When we sent our broccoli off, it was, I can't remember what the price was, it might have been $5 a kilo, and half of the consignment went in at $5 a kilo, and the next day I get a rejection on the other half of the consignment. And of course that was happening because the price was coming down. And then of course I get an email that says, here's the one bug that they found in your broccoli. Your broccoli was riddled with bugs. And it's like, well, it was the same consignment, picked on the same day, from the same cool room, from the same paddock. It's all exactly the same, but you're telling me half of it was okay and they took that, and the other half is apparently riddled with bugs. They're not going to take that. And what was the solution? For the intermediary that I was dealing through to take the broccoli back, shift it around a little bit, and then put it into another distribution centre at a lower price. So there is no question that there have been practices by the supermarkets that are really, really detrimental. But and we talk about the specifications of the produce, whether it's size or cauliflowers are particularly problematic because you've got to keep them snow white, and you do that by keeping the leaves, hiding the cauliflower in the leaves and all sorts of things. But when we're talking about specifications, when the market goes on cauliflowers from, say, $38 a box to, say, $50 a box, you get a phone call from your intermediary and say, just put anything in there. Doesn't matter. The size doesn't matter anymore. The colour doesn't matter anymore. All of these specifications fly out the window because there is a shortage in supply. So you can see that those market, kind of that power imbalance does have an impact. I'm just trying to say that what we need to do is separate the two conversations out. That conversation about the relationship between suppliers and the supermarkets, I think, is problematic when it plays out in the public because it's being taken advantage of. And that's not actually helpful to growers, because we're not, despite all of the conversations that are happening. I've been told from a number of suppliers that there's particular practices that not only have they not stopped, but if anything, that they've actually increased since the conversation has started. So I don't think that the conversation is having a massive impact on the supermarkets and the way that they're doing business with suppliers, but I do think it's enabling other people to take advantage.
I have plenty more questions here and a short follow-up one as well, but just remember, if you're in the room and you have a question, you need, because it's a very long room and I'm having trouble doing this very broad tennis-type scan, to jump up and wave your hands around wildly, and one of these fine New South Wales Farmers Committee members will run towards you with a microphone and you can do your own interpretive dance. We've got one here to start off. Thanks.
Hi, Dennis Howard from The Land. Just wondering, Mick, has there been enough political will to address these practices that Emma was mentioning over the last 20 years? And do you see the Senate committee and also your inquiry actually making a substantial change?
I think in response to your first question, I think there's no doubt governments have struggled with the nature of markets, and horticulture and vegetable markets in particular have been problematic. If you look at the nature of them, they've got highly perishable products, they've got very opaque pricing and very difficult to find appropriate price discovery. Even the volumes coming forward are very uncertain and very unknown, and of course quite seasonal as well. So all those elements in together make it for a very difficult market. And it's interesting, I was reading the findings of the 1960 Royal Commission into the Victorian markets, and the quote there would apply equally today. The quote, the findings, so that the fact that Royal Commission was held in 1960 and handed down its findings, and when you read it, it's describing the current market in some respects. Slightly less mafia influence, I suspect, but pretty much the same market. So that tells you...
Or they just got more sophisticated.
That tells you the answer to your first question. And sorry, I've forgotten the second element of that. Look, in terms of our inquiry, we, as I've described, will have a very detailed, data-rich, objective inquiry, and the findings of that will be presented in our report and to government. But we're not rule makers or lawmakers. Governments ultimately make the decision about whether they adopt those recommendations and what they do about it. So I think that's my answer to your second question.
Another one from the room.
Mick, Tim Powell from Dentsu. Emma kind of hints that we framed up the problem in the wrong way. So can I ask you a general question about competition and price inflation for farm businesses? If you took a broader view about competition policy, where do you think the biggest impact on input prices for farmers are, and what should we do about it?
I think it varies commodity by commodity. There's no doubt that in the horticulture sector, where sometimes up to 50% of input costs are in fact labour, a change in the price of labour and indeed in the availability of labour is a very significant impact. In the grain sector, it's very much fertiliser and fuel. In the livestock sector, a bit of a mix of both. So I don't think there's a straight answer to that, and it's not the role of the ACCC to control prices. Never has been, and hopefully never will be. So people come to us and say, they're price gouging, can you do something about it? And particularly when it's a farmer coming to me, I say, well, next time there's a shortage in the lamb market and your lambs get $50 extra at Corowa, will I accuse you of price gouging? So you can see that highlights how tricky that issue of prices are. We do a lot of price monitoring. So fuel, for example, is an enduring responsibility we have to monitor the prices of and try and instruct consumers how they can best manage those prices. But beyond that, in a market economy such as we have, governments are reluctant to and shouldn't control prices where markets are actually working okay.
Emma, following on from that, you mentioned earlier that input prices in a very broad sense were a very, very strong pressure, and you also said that the governments have a lot more influence over these things than they're kind of letting on to the general public. Where are the policy levers that you would most like to see urgent action in terms of those prices going into the system?
There's again, it's like there's just so many things that are making things so expensive. I mean, it's the fact that we don't have decent roads. I don't know how you're going here in New South Wales, but if you visit Victoria, it's a bit like a third world country. Make sure you're in a decent four-wheel drive. That productivity issue is another significant issue. So actually the staff are becoming less productive as well as more expensive. So that really compounds that particular problem. The frustration for me is when we and again, it sounds like I'm just government bashing or Labor bashing. I'm not Labor bashing. I'm happy if the other guys were in, I'd bash them too, because it's usually much of a muchness, and people just make political decisions. They don't make hard decisions that are the right decisions. Every decision that is made is about getting voted in next time. Every single thing comes back to the politics of it rather than the practicalities of it. So it is about having really good infrastructure, and I'm saying in regards to the total cost of production by the time it gets to a supermarket. I'm not saying necessarily on a farm, although that might be, that's problematic. Industrial relations, even if we don't talk about the cost of the staff, the fact now that, like I spent, I don't know how many hours the other day, now I've reduced the size of my business because of the labour impost. It's not just because it's expensive, it's because it's bloody impossible. Everything you have to do now, whether it's actually managing your payroll and the convoluted industrial relations system, which there is always, a court case about, or a union expose, or, they've got to be level 1 and then they've got to be level 2 and then it's 3 months and it's 5 months and a wage review, on and on and on. All of that sort of thing has a massive impact. It's actually more complicated to run your business. So not only are the prices of your inputs becoming more expensive, the price of managing your business is becoming more expensive too, because everything's so complicated. Planning issues with local government is creating significant issues. Land use conflict is creating significant issues. All of these things, I actually always talk about it as the death by 1,000 cuts. So you've got to identify what the 1,000 cuts are, because it's not one big thing. And it'd be really nice if we could just say it's just this one big thing, but it's not. It's an attitude that we have around caring about the fact that we do primary production in this country. Because here's a real easy way to make things cheaper. Let's buy it all out of South America and Asia, and there you go, problem fixed. No, what's wrong with that? Maybe that's what the answer is. Now, we would give away so many things if we decided to do that, but that's why, just to say that the end goal is cheap food, that really bothers me. I think that every Australian should be able to afford Australian produce, but I don't think that food should be cheap. I don't think it's right that when you go into the supermarket, it costs you $2 for a Mars bar and it costs you 70 cents for a banana, and then we complain that the cost of food is too expensive, right? So again, it's an attitude about valuing the fact that we do farming in Australia and valuing all of the other things aside from the food and fibre that comes out of that. It's regional communities and their security and that they can thrive. There's so many things about having that food security that we just don't care about, because it's been so abundant and so plentiful for the last 70 years in this country. We've forgotten what it was like when we didn't have enough food, or we were sharing a handful of potatoes with people. So if we don't value that Australian production, and this is probably my message to the supermarkets, you make us jump through hoops for all of the ESG stuff. So you want an ethical supply chain, and you want me to fill out all the forms for that, and you want us to show about your carbon emissions, and you want to know what the biodiversity is. And I'm probably pitching into the future, but this is where the whole thing's heading. You want me to look after the koala on my farm, you want me to grow a tree, you want me to put carbon into the soil, you want me to do absolutely everything for you from an ESG, this cute buzzword. But part of our ESG as a nation is not identifying that having Australian farms and Australian farmers is so meaningful to us as a country, because we haven't been invaded for a really long time. And I don't want to be a bobcatter and say the sky's going to fall in, but if we were to see this geopolitical tension that we're living in this environment, if that escalates, you know how easy it is to turn off all the lights in Australia? And we've seen what happens when you turn the lights off in Melbourne for about 5 minutes. People lose their friggin' minds. Never mind the fact that on our dairy farms, you've got to make sure you've got a generator, otherwise you're walking your cows down, 20 kilometres down to the neighbour, because despite the fact that you're hosting a transmission line, you don't have meaningful power, a secure supply of power or, affordable power on your own farm. So we have got all of these things. Agriculture has so much to offer. You're asking us to do everything for you, but we don't value it. And I think that if the supermarkets particularly, because I know the conversation's about the supermarkets, even though I keep saying that seems a bit unfair to me, if the supermarkets valued Australian food production as part of their ESG, I think the whole vibe would shift, because we've made some really meaningful inroads around ethical supply. Why can't we be thinking about what KPIs can we use to measure the value of Australian farms and doing that? Why isn't the supermarket's procurement policy Australian-made first and foremost? So it's cute, we say, oh, yeah, but 97% of the vegetables and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, great, because it's still cheaper to do that by and large. But what about all of the stuff in the cans? What about all of the stuff in the freezers? What about all of the stuff that's at the supermarket that's got nothing to do with food? We're not actually valuing manufacturing in Australia, despite let's do the manufacturing, woo-wee. The agriculture is still the manufacturing industry that is here right now, and we're not taking care of it, but you want to start thinking about what else we can manufacture? Well, good luck, because no one can afford anyone, and there's no one here to do it. So.
We've got another question from the floor, but I think that point on valuing the way we sustainably produce food in this country for many reasons, including what we can put back into the system from a natural capital point of view and a human capital point of view, is very valid.
Thank you. Matthew Madden, I've grown and produced Australia and a farmer from Moree. I like your points there, Emma, because one way to reduce the cost of food is just buy it cheaper from farmers. Now, we'll all be out of business. However, and this is probably too big, I'm hoping the ACCC does go into those points that you made, Emma, about the supply chain costs. Because of the disconnect from what a farmer might see as he gets for his a tonne of wheat, 3 to 20 cents in a loaf of bread. You may have seen the 15 cents in a schooner of beer for barley. Now, where are those pricing? And are they, we know they're not simple, but at least they should be identified as a whole supply chain cost. Sorry, Emma, and back to the horticulture, we have similar problems in wheat with the subjective testing of our produce. We're hoping and moving forward towards some AI that it's not going to solve those problems, but at least we might get, pretty basic vernacular, shafted at the point of sale. At least we can, our grain is not quite, we can store it. Fresh food is just a disaster for in those points. But anyway, thank you, and thank you for those words.
We take that as a statement rather than a question. Robert.
Can I have a
you had
I have a
answered nearly
microphone.
all of those as I was getting my question ready. Thank you.
I have a microphone, so I'm going to take advantage of it. Robert Hardy from NBN. Emma, you spoke earlier about the advocacy bodies and the things they've been saying in this debate and who's to blame and what's to do. You're going to hate me for asking you this, but I've given you bully pulpit, so I'm going to make you use it. I want you to say who's at fault for the advocacy bodies saying what they're saying. Is it the members who are ill-informed or perhaps uninformed about what's actually happening, or are they being led astray by people who have their own agenda?
Well, Bob Catter gets away with it, right? So let's just... whose fault is it? Well, we've set up these advocacy groups the same way that political parties set themselves up. Literally, my branches at the Victorian Farmers Federation are basically the branches of the National Party in Victoria. So... firstly, all of us get around like little mini politicians, and then we have to get voted in for things. So the dog whistling, I think that to say there wasn't a legitimate issue where there needed to be advocacy done around the supermarkets is like I would be talking shit. Like I've just said to you, like all of the reasons why on my farm, like I've had problems interfacing with the supermarkets, or the supply chain that gets me to a supermarket. So that's a real issue. I know that the NFF went out and asked a whole bunch of farmers, what are your biggest issues? And they said the supermarkets. Now, you can't ask. Sometimes a farmer can tell you, okay, I can go to the doctor and I can say, I've got rheumatic fever. That's actually what my problem is. And that's you wouldn't bother going to the doctor and telling them, you don't, well, I do, but most people go to the doctor and ask the doctor to diagnose the problem. What we do when we go to the doctor is we tell them a bunch of symptoms that we've got. I've got a runny nose, I've got a temperature, or I've got my foot hurts, this one, that one, and the other one. We expect the doctor to diagnose the problem and the doctor to come up with the treatment. What we often do as farmers before we get into the actual bodies is that we diagnose our own problem. We say we've got a problem with the supermarkets. Now, you might not even be doing business with the supermarkets and you've determined that your problem is with the supermarkets. Often farmers fail to properly identify where the problem is, and the organisations have been run by farmers for a long time, which is great because I think that's where the passion comes from, but you've got to make sure that you've got professionals there who are actually able to distill. You're telling me all of these symptoms. Let me work out what the problem is. Let me come back and road test that with you. We don't do it like that. We let the farmers come up with the problems and the solutions and the advocacy, and sometimes means that the Farmers Federations collectively, all 233 million of them, can sometimes get it wrong. And then the other thing is that you don't generally want to be the person who's disagreeing. So right now, for me to say, actually, despite the fact that I might have hated the supermarkets, that's not what we should be talking about here. So from the VFF perspective, we came out immediately and said, this is the wrong way to go about it. We want to engage directly with the supermarkets and actually work on solutions with them and say this mechanism or that particular thing or maybe this or maybe that, and create that safe space for maybe the suppliers to be having that conversation into the supermarkets in a way that they wouldn't as an individual business. But to just jump on the bandwagon and do the dog whistle, I think is actually more detrimental to the farmers that you're trying to help. So there are a lot of people that said the issue is the supermarkets, and I'm not sure that that's really what the issue was at that point in time. So I think that's particularly why that has kind of been led astray. And then also we're sometimes trying to curry favour with political parties and politicians at any particular point in time in regards to how we do our advocacy. But please sign up to your local advocacy body, please, which is, I mean, this is why we do this here in New South Wales, not in Victoria. But I think that if there were no bodies, then, sorry, not that they're nobodies, if there were no farming advocacy groups, we would be worse off. But is there a lot of room for improvement and sophistication in how we get our message across, and actually, like I said, proper problem definition and then proper policy solutions? I have met with both the supermarkets since this kind of thing started and had conversations, and the thing that they're saying to me is, tell us the particular mechanisms that you would like us to change. No one has told us that yet. So if the supermarkets are saying, but hang on a minute, you haven't even engaged with us, I think it's operating in really poor faith to go out and say it's all the supermarket's fault. Again, if you can't tell them what should be being done better, then it's a bit disingenuous just to start dog whistling and saying, oh, they're terrible and so on and so forth. And like I said, some of the messaging has been so problematic because it's talking about this notion of how we should never be saying that food should be cheaper. And like I said, the butcher will cost you more. And there's reasons why the butcher will cost you more. And as a consumer, you've got all of that choice. But if we're saying that the supermarkets are price gouging, what are we saying about all of our other customers that are buying our products from farms? So hopefully that got me into suitable trouble with everybody. Thanks for that.
Andrew Marshall from Farm Online, Australian community media. Further to that, clearly we need strong agricultural representation. Why is the VFF trying to blow up the NFF? What's going wrong? I would expect that...
No, I'll make comment. Someone suggested no comment, but that's you don't know me very well if you think that there'll be no comment.
Politically, a whole spectrum of different agricultural sector ideas is so easy to deal with because they can just get the different farm organisations fighting with each other. I'm sure it's the same with the supermarkets. What's your game plan?
Okay, to be really clear, I'm not trying to blow up the NFF. I'm trying to blow up everybody else. I'm not really trying to blow up everybody else, but when you've got 270 different voices in Australia saying that they represent farmers, and then the people that we're trying to advocate to can cherry pick the answer that suits them the best on any particular day is not helpful. There is about, and thanks to Katie, who should be telling you more about it, the AFI did a report on the way that advocacy happens for farmers, and I realise we're a bit off topic, but these 270 groups, if you look just at the NFF family, there's about $100 million worth of operating expenses sloshing around in a bucket. And I don't think that we are getting the outcomes. If you look at what the Pharmacy Guild is able to achieve, if you look at what the Minerals Council is able to achieve and other groups, I don't think that we are getting the outcomes for the $100 million, because often, and I've only got 6 months to go, and it can't get any worse. They've asked for my head on a platter 3 times and 6 times and they've failed, so I shouldn't be biting my tongue now. There is something about, like I said, about identity, the way that we do our farms, and we're so connected to our farms, that culture of that group of people plays through into our organisations. They're not very good at doing succession, so when a young female wog who grows the wrong product, it's not grains and it's not dairy, sorry everybody, wasn't supposed to be the president of the VFF, there has been a massive challenge there moving forward. In regards to how do we become more professional, because the way that we have to do advocacy has to be more sophisticated than just yelling at the sky from our paddocks. We have to go to government, supermarkets, local councils, whoever, we have to go to them with better solutions. Define the problem, work out how to help the person or the entity. So if it's the government now, I go there and I say, oh, I see you want to have 95% renewable power in Victoria by 2035. Like, good luck. But because you've done it this way, you're actually going to slow yourself down from meeting your own target. And can I suggest that if you did it this way, it would actually speed up your ability to get to those targets? So we don't frame the problem anymore by just saying, frame the solution by just saying you've got it wrong. We tell them what it is that we think that they should be doing. And when you separate, we've got this pie, but when you cut the pie into literally 270 different pieces, we are all talking about how we're running off the smell of an oily rag, despite the fact that it's farmers who are paying us this money for us to pass around and around and around in a circle. So for me, I just think that there is a better way to do structure that will get us better outcomes. So what's the structure? I'm not supposed to tell you what the structure is, because if I tell you, you'll disagree with it. We've got to wait for somebody else to come up with the idea, and when we agree with it, we'll just promote that. At a first step, I won't tell you what I think the last step is. At a first step, we need to do a proper analysis, and it's an accountant who has to do it, not a farmer running a political organisation, that says this is how much money collectively all of the organisations are spending on industrial relations advice to farmers. This is how much they're all spending on their media. This is how many headcount they've got doing their payroll, and look at how we can, at the very least, we won't go to logos and egos, as Robert Hardy would say. At the very least, we should be consolidating the back of house so that we can get more out of it, and maybe that will build some goodwill. The other way to do it is just to say you're going to stop paying everybody, and everybody loses their minds, and then they might have to work out where they're going to get their money from. But at the very least, we've got to have a real conversation, because what's coming down the line at farmers or to farmers, I think, is more substantial as an issue, as issues or a group of issues, than we've seen before, and we are under-equipped in regards to being able to deal with that. All of those organisations. No environmental lawyer employed. How could we possibly not have an environmental lawyer at this point in our gigs when we're employing hundreds? That is a key personnel that's missing, and that's just one example. Sorry, I'm trying to go really quick because I know it's not the topic.
That's all right. Well, it relates to the topic, and I should also point out that AFI stopped counting at 270. That doesn't mean there's only 270.
Exactly.
It wasn't scope of the project. We just did it as a bit of an exercise, back of the envelope exercise, and then we realised it was taking too much time, and we drew a line under it. So more than 270. And the big problem, as Emma's pointed out, is not that there's 270, because a number of different voices helps to amplify, but if they're all doing the same thing, and I can guarantee you that of those, 90% would be built on exactly an identical model, replicating work that another organisation is doing. That's where the problem is. Coming from that, segueing back into supermarkets, Mick, you heard from more than 20,000 people in your survey, and you had a lot of road shows as well, and you had a lot of submissions sent in. Out of that group, and we're talking about now how people do tend to replicate and duplicate things across Australia, did you hear anything that surprised you, that really stood out as being an unexpected intervention point?
That would be asking me to speculate or foreshadow the outcomes, which I'm not in a position to do. So I just thought it was noteworthy that where we've got an issue we're looking into, and we put out an opportunity for engagement, we would typically get in the hundreds respond, not 22,000. So that really, I think, signals the concerns that, and I guess you'd have to assume from that those who responded were motivated out of their concerns. So take that as an understanding of the nature of the people who responded. So that means that, you know, there's a significant proportion of the community concerned, and look, likely you would say they're concerned about the cost of living rather than necessarily supermarkets per se. I think that's a reasonable assumption. But there is a lot of information in their responses that is more specific to the supermarkets as well. So certainly that has been interesting. I think we've been running supplier roundtables, and it's been interesting hearing directly from, instead of the representative bodies, the actual suppliers themselves and their experiences. And again, I'm not going to foreshadow the outcome of that, but I think that's been a quite important part of our inquiry, and I guess reflects on Emma's comments about the difference between, for example, representative bodies and what they might say, and what individuals might say of their own experiences.
Can I add one thing while we're pissing everybody off? Yeah, you can. No, you can. I will. I'll be polite, only to you, Katie. The other thing that I think we probably need to have a conversation about, even as a society, and I say society rather than being government-led, we have expectations around how wealthy we are as individuals and what it is that we are entitled to and what it is that we deserve. So there's this global economic kind of situation playing out, but nobody in Australia wants to accept that might mean that the quality of life drops away, or the discretionary spend on nice to haves has to drop away. So it's kind of, we know at the same time that hospitality spending, tourism spending is actually still on the increase because there's individuals that are still able to afford it. We probably need to also be having conversations around this kind of crude use of the interest rate to try and curb inflation, because it's just not quite working out perfectly like how they would like it to, because there's people who can simply still afford to go and spend when there are people who literally can't afford their mortgage. And people will say, I will pay my mortgage before I will buy the food at the supermarket, right? So, and even that in and of itself is probably a strange kind of, I think that's weird, right? Like if you think of the hierarchy of needs, most of the time you'll start with food before you want to live in your own house. But here, where we're used to being kind of rich enough, we want to insist on being able to, you know, the Australian dream of having our own house and all of those things. So we kind of do have to collectively accept that you might actually be the person where going to the supermarket was really convenient for you because you didn't want to put the time into going to this market on a, you know, Saturday afternoon right before it closes, and you can literally buy 2 boxes of apples for $10. People aren't doing that. In my role at the Queen Victoria market, we're, as a board, really grappling with the traders, trying to explain to them that they've got to change their trading hours because they still want to be there at 5 o'clock in the morning. They're like, you've got to do more marketing for Tuesday morning. Tuesday morning at 7 a.m. it's dead. It's like, that's because my nonna is dead. And my nonna was the only one who was going to buy apples in boxes to stew because they came from a place where they were literally hungry before they got on a boat and came to Australia. They've lived that. I'm built for a recession. It's culturally just in my blood. I'm ready for it. And I can tell you how you can, if Curtis Stone can tell you how to feed your family for $10 or less, I can tell you how to do it for $5, right? But we don't have a mentality about how to eat like that, how to cook like that, how to purchase like that for our families. And there is just a bit of a cold, hard reality. Shit's expensive. Like it just simply is. We don't make the fertiliser here. We're buying it from somewhere else. There are all these global factors. Things became expensive. So yes, we can do more, like from a government policy perspective, but there is just a little bit of reality that sometimes we're in a boom and sometimes we're in a bust, and that you have to change your practices when you're in a bust. So not that it's helpful here, but you can go to the Queen Victoria market and buy like any number of boxes of vegetables right before they're going to close up, and then you might be less pissed off at the supermarkets. But if you want to have the convenience of being able to get the nappies and get the thing and get the vegetables and the meat and the this one and the that one from a supermarket, well, you know, they are charging you also for the convenience. They're charging you for their giant car park that means that you can park out the front and walk straight in and all of those things. So we also have to take a bit of responsibility, I think, as individuals and say, is my expectation out of kilter with the reality of the world right now?
Thank you, Emma, and thank you, Mick.